Hello friends of paper-bound knowledge transfer, and welcome to another video on my channel, another book review. The book I've chosen for this week's review, it seems quite fitting because of the events in Afghanistan in the last 2 weeks, and in fact the ongoing events at the Kabul International Airport right now. And the book I'm talking about and I'm going to review today is Learning to Eat Soup with a Knife, Counterinsurgency Lessons from Malaya and Vietnam, written by John A. Nagal, who was, among other things, a former American military officer. In this book, he takes 2 examples of counterinsurgency wars or campaigns, the one in Malaya from 1948 to 1957, and the American involvement in the Vietnam War. And he uses those 2 examples to shed some light on how, in his opinion, winning or successfully conducting such a war or campaign can be done successfully. Well, that sounds interesting and maybe can help us to understand what happened in Afghanistan, I don't know. And so let's now have a look at that book in a bit more detail. Let's at first talk about the structure and the content of the book. It starts with a foreword by a General Peter Shoemaker, and then there's quite an interesting chapter after that, a new preface, new to this paperback edition, of the author. Because after writing this book, or the first version of it, the first edition of it, he actually served in a counterinsurgency campaign in 2003, I think, in Iraq. So he took some of the experiences and lessons he learned there and adapted them or put them in the book and kind of reflected on what he had written earlier about this topic. And he points out some mistakes he made in his analysis and maybe some points he should have emphasized more. That's quite an interesting change of perspective right there. After that, the real content, real meat of the book starts, and it is structured mainly in 4 big chapters or parts. Part 1 sets the stage for the rest of the book by talking about how armies learn, giving an overview about historical insurgencies in world history, and talking about differences in organization and culture of the 2 armies under discussion here, so the British and the American army of the 50s and 60s and so on. Part 2 and 3 then deal with the 2 insurgencies and the learning processes of the 2 armies in those 2 wars, those 2 counterinsurgency campaigns, so in Malaya and Vietnam. They really they do focus a lot on institutional learning processes and the experience of those 2 armies during those processes in those 2 wars. The last part, part 4, then gives an overview of the findings of the 2 previous chapters, and it gives some thoughts on organizational culture and on learning institutions. It is, I think, notable that at the end of each chapter there is quite an extensive bibliography, giving room for more reading on the topic. Let's now have a look at the positive and the negative aspects that I think are noteworthy. For negative aspects, I think that should at least be noted. It's not really negative. I understand why the author did this. This book focuses, in my mind, more on the military aspects of a campaign and on what the military should do. But I think a more complete look at a counterinsurgency campaign would incorporate a lot more information on political how-tos, like don't maybe bet on bad people and warlords, I don't know, whatever. And that should be noted and should be clear to the reader that this is more focusing on the military matters, while of course saying yes, all tools of the state should be employed in a counterinsurgency campaign, diplomatic, economic aid, whatever. For a positive aspect, I think it is very positive in this case, as it often is, I think, of having the newer edition of the book, the paperback edition. Yes, it might be a paperback, which some of my viewers really don't like, but the foreword that is only in the paperback edition about the experience of the author in Iraq is extremely interesting and puts a lot of stuff into perspective, both for the author, of course, but also for the reader. So I think it's a real benefit to have that in this book. And now for my final verdict on this book. I think this book is a very interesting study on the military problem of fighting a counterinsurgency campaign. Maybe it could even be used as a handbook for some military personnel to craft parts of their counterinsurgency operation. It does lack a deeper look, in my mind, on the political problems of fighting a counterinsurgency war, more strategic questions maybe. But that's okay, that's not the scope of this book, and of course the author fully acknowledges that those aspects are very important. In total, this book, in my mind, is absolutely readable. I absolutely recommend buying and reading it if you are interested in the topic. Because I haven't read on this topic, any other books, no other articles I could really recommend, this is already the end of my video. If you have any other reading recommendations for me, maybe in this topic, put them in a comment below. I would be very interested in hearing them. I would also be very interested in hearing your opinion on this book, because this is of course only my opinion. So if you want, leave me a comment on them as well. So far, thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Have fun reading. Goodbye.